really want technology companies to succeed. And it's just so sad. This money could have been spent on delivering water to the poor. It could have been spent on good technologies, blah, blah, blah.
Welcome to the stream, an unscripted, unedited, free-flowing conversation featuring guests who reject the status quo with a bias for action in the world of water and beyond. My name is Tom Freyberg. I'm an environmental journalist and content creator specializing in water.
And I'm Sarni, a water strategist.
We can put that one in the blooper reel afterwards as well, all right?
And I'm Sarni, a water strategy consultant, doing my part to solve wicked water problems.
There we go. Great. Well,
that's never happened.
Hey, look, dude.
That's always the first.
Yeah, we're 30 episodes in, so it's allowed to happen once.
Reinhard, I'm under a lot of pressure here to perform, I feel. So anyway.
Alrighty, well, we're very pleased to welcome Dr. Reinhard Hübner, who is the CEO of SKion Water, as our season finale of episode 10, season 3. Reinhard, good to see you, and welcome.
Yeah, same here, and thanks for having me for this last episode of the season. I really look forward to our conversation.
Reinhard, I'm glad you threw in for this season as opposed to like the last episode ever. So thanks.
It depends on the ratings of this one, right? So no pressure.
I don't want to be the one killing it, right? I want to be optimistic that afterwards it's going to be.
It's going to look like a hockey stick, Reinhard.
Like all the business plans we get, right?
Exactly.
From zero to hero in 5 years, $1 billion in turnover and 600 million in EBITDA.
We're going to double profits year 2 to year 3, right? Yeah, we've heard it. Good. So what we want to do here is kind of, I guess, not a traditional conversation. Reinhard, you've been involved in a lot of interviews and things where people talk about why water, why invest in water, the value of water, which I think people have heard lots of times before. But we want to get your perspective today on when things haven't worked out, right? You've been involved in investing in water solutions for some time. Not all bets sometimes pay off, and you've perhaps got the battle scars.
Betting never works.
Yeah, exactly. You can't.
In betting, always the bank wins or the company that operates the betting scheme, right?
Right. The house always wins, but you can't, as an investor, always bet on the right horse. So we just want to hear like some of the lessons, experiences, stories you've got. But I think for people, I mean, most people listening, I think will know of you and SKion, but just give us a real quick elevator pitch on kind of your background coming from a utility and why that gives you a great perspective as an investor as well.
Well, I don't know if it gives me a great perspective as an investor, but my background is manufacturing logistics, and I got into water more or less by accident doing utility operations. I worked for Thames Water for almost 2 years. Over a longer period, and then some other utilities in the gas in Australia. So I started on the shit side of the business on a very big wastewater treatment plant and gradually worked myself up to drinking water. And when we bought Ovivo, I realized that there's something more than drinking water, which is ultra pure water that goes into semiconductor. That's about as clean as it can get.
Yeah.
So I started on the operation side, and since 2010, I'm with SKion. And at SKion, I built up what today is SKion Water, and the team that worked with me, of course, I didn't do it alone. And SKion Water today is providing drinking water and wastewater solutions to municipal customers and freshwater and wastewater solutions to industrial customers around the world. It's roughly 3,000 people and $800 million in turnover. And I have the pleasure of being the CEO of that thing.
Reinhard, you left out your management consulting experience at the beginning.
It was 8 years at McKinsey, and that's also where I did the stints at Thames Water and City of New York and Melbourne. But I was unusually operational for a McKinsey consultant, I would say.
I thought that was a really interesting aspect of your background. I mean, everything is, but starting there and what you learned in terms of strategy and getting things done, I thought was really fascinating.
It's interesting, actually. Sorry, but Reinhard, when I said about having the utility background, and you said, I'm not sure if that gives me the right credentials for an investor, but I think what it does do is you understand where the piece of the puzzle fits, right? If someone comes to you pitching around a solution for municipal water supplies, you've got experience. Because we've had previous conversations where you said to me, Tom, we're talking about a digital startup, and you said, I just want to grab hold of the sensor and go and test the damn thing myself. Roll up my sleeves, right? How often do you actually speak to an investor that says that or can do that or has a history and experience to do that? And I think that's perhaps a unique element to what you bring?
I mean, if you take municipal water and wastewater, it's an asset-intensive industry. The vast majority of the value of the asset sits underground in pipes.
Right.
Because digging in pipes and making all that network work is more expensive than the treatment part, and also more capital intensive. So yes, digital helps a lot, and there's amazing digital solutions also for network operations. But at the end, we still have to build assets that last at least 100 years. And when I worked at Thames, we replaced the drinking water pipes that were 140 years old and were put in place with in Queen Victoria's times. Very nice, heavy cast iron pieces. And we replaced the stuff that was put in the 60s and 70s that was crappy quality and had to be replaced after 50 or 60 years. We can't afford to replace stuff that's 50 or 60 years old because the reinvestment amount is less than 1%, and that means that stuff lasts more than 100 years. It's as simple as that. That's simple math.
Yeah. So it's good to hear about your sort of asset rehabilitation experience. But when we were talking about kind of things that didn't work out before this call, you said, well, one of your first investments could actually be classed as a kind of a failure. It just didn't work, right? So let's rewind.
It was not kind of a failure. It was a failure.
A catastrophic failure. Okay, let's say it how it is. It was disaster.
If you consider losing a few millions not a failure, but just kind of a failure, I don't know. It was a failure.
It depends if it's your money or not. I mean,
No, it depends not on that. I mean, at the end, the money could have been put to use somewhere else, right?
Yes, that's really well put. Really well put.
So what was making that thing a failure? It was a company that did chemical-free cooling tower water treatment, and the things they did actually were relevant. There's a lot of chemicals used in cooling tower water treatment, and it would be nice from an environmental point of view if we could do this without chemicals. Now, the problem was not particularly the technology, and also not particularly the team. It was a good team, it was a good technology, but the business model just didn't work out. If you look at a chemical-free system, you sell CapEx once, and the sales per customer is, say, 50 to 150,000 euros, then the effort to sell is I don't know how many customer visits, and the back end effort in engineering and R&D and God knows what is also there. You will just never get to break even because a salesperson can maybe sell, if it's a good guy, after year 2 or 3, can sell $500,000 worth of projects that has a gross margin. If you're lucky, 50%. If you're not lucky, 40%. So you gross in something like 200K, and then you have to pay with these 200K for all the overhead. It just will never work. The technology worked in most cases, but the business model didn't work, and it was linked to the startup that has only one product. The single product startup in water can be a recipe for disaster financially, unless the projects are big enough so that you can pay for the sales effort. So if you do the math on this, on how to get it to break even, it's just almost mission impossible in hindsight. And that's what we didn't know. We didn't know how long it takes to sell and how many visits it takes. And that's different for somebody who sells the treatment chemicals in the same cooling system, because he has recurring revenues. Every year he sells those chemicals. And then he can go to the next plant and to the next plant that are next door and sell the same thing. But convincing somebody to buy a new technology is very different from selling a consumable.
Right. It's often repeat contracts on those chemical companies, right? Yeah. Exactly.
So in the end, we more or less, we didn't completely abandon the business. We integrated it into our platform Envirochemie after we had bought Envirochemie. But we lost several millions on that thing, and it was not because the technology didn't work or the team didn't work. But we changed our strategy afterwards. We learned a lot, right? We learned about the challenges of selling into this market, and we figured out we have to do it differently.
So Reinhard, is this a case of an innovative technology that really just doesn't have a business model that is viable in the water sector?
There's two parts to it. One is it the technology that has no viable business model? The differentiating factors weren't big enough. So yes, it was a good technology, but it was not like distinctive enough to survive on its own. That's one. But the other piece is the startup model doesn't work. If you sell something like that as part of a broader portfolio as an established company, it can be much easier to sell it because your sales guy has more visits in the vicinity and doesn't have to travel to this one customer just for this one, has more products he can sell to the same customer. So your economics are different. So it's a combination of the business model of the technology and the business model of the startup. The startup business model in water is also just tough because of the fragmentation of this industry.
Yeah, it struck me when you were sort of laying this all out that, from a sustainability perspective, someone would look at that and say, great technology, great business idea, no chemicals, that's exactly what we need. But it hit the reality of, well, you can't make money.
Exactly. It was impossible to get that thing to break even. And at some point you have to say, stop loss.
Right. Exactly. I do like your thinking around, well, just integrate that into a business so it's not a standalone, essentially push and rope.
I mean, what we decided afterwards is we need to have end customer relationships where we have the expertise, but also the trust of the end customer so that we can try new things. And for that, we bought what is established companies that have this end customer relationship. And I'll just give you an example of the other way around. Today we are, pretty much 100% owner of a company called Sembrain in Denmark. They do silicon carbide membranes. And we introduced this membrane to the semiconductor market via Ovivo. At the beginning, we were a customer. We were just a customer. But no semiconductor manufacturer on this planet would buy a membrane from a startup company in Denmark. Not because of Denmark, but because of a startup company. Semiconductor manufacturers, if their water system doesn't work, their fab doesn't work.
It's mission critical, yeah.
Exactly. But they would buy from Ovivo because Ovivo has been a supplier to them for decades. And so Ovivo was able to introduce this membrane to the semiconductor market for some of their wastewater, where there's lots of chemicals in this wastewater. So a silicon carbide membrane actually has distinctive advantages. But that's something that Sembrain would have never achieved on its own, that we would have never achieved on its own. You need to have that end customer relationship. And that's how we try to bring technologies to the market, by de-risking it for the customer, but obviously also with our engineering expertise, we de-risk it for us. And then we can show something unique to our customers.
So what you learned from that, I guess you could call it a catastrophic failure of losing millions on the investment, actually was a lesson, because you learned to broaden your contact base and be able to connect that ecosystem more so than just relying on investing in that single solution to start with.
We learned that. We also learned to be very careful in the startup business model. And that's also why whenever I talk about investing into startups or venture capital in water, I say, if you really want to do the startup route, do it, but think about whom you partner with, because if you try to do it alone, the threshold is so high to make it. And if you partner with established players, you can just de-risk it so much. You might not make it a unicorn that becomes the glorious exit, because that partner will want something in return for helping you. But the statistical failure rate of startups in water is so high, also for good technologies. Just don't try it that way. Partner more, work with established companies. Yes, it's not as sexy maybe as having this unicorn, but how many unicorns were there in water? Hardly any, right?
I don't think there's been a single unicorn in the water industry. When it comes to a company, you could take a digital company that was sold for $1 billion, but that's not technically a unicorn from startup to where it was, right? That was already established. So I've heard of the unicorn market in terms of like MBR becoming a unicorn valuation of over $1 billion, but actually the single solution and company. Someone said this to me the other day. Is there ever going to be a unicorn startup in the water industry? And I don't know, it was another investor and they were quite critical and they didn't think it's going to happen.
So this is interesting. So you don't view that unnamed company that was purchased for $1 billion as a unicorn. And I'm not pushing back on that, but it brings up an interesting aspect of where they started and the sale.
Yeah, I think it was because of the like you would think a unicorn is a startup from the creation, venture capital funding, private equity to being sold, right? But I think this unnamed company, which I think most people are aware of, was spun out of a consultancy and went through different iterations before eventually being bought as a $1 billion. So I think
it's more. There are of course unicorns in water. I mean, there's big guys who are worth more than $1 billion, and it's more. This was not the founders selling their business with venture capital in there anymore, right?
Right. So I don't want to sidetrack the conversation, but this is really interesting because people are referring it to the water sector's first unicorn. But anyway, so now that we've beat that one to death, we can move on.
Well, I think it's an interesting question topic. I know we could probably riff on it a bit more, but Reinhard, when you've talked about that chemical innovation, right? Something that struck me from previous conversations around investing in the right person and the right team. And tell us about some of your experience on that, whereas perhaps you've invested into an individual who's kind of perhaps the inventor or the innovator behind the solution, and actually things didn't quite work out where that particular innovation wasn't the right fit to take the company to the next level.
I mean, let's talk about people. I mean, the water industry is a people business, right? Because we live off the experience of people where you don't have IP like or sexy products like an iPhone or something like that. So at the end, it's the knowledge of the people to solve the problems of a water user. What I have experienced is two types of issues, or whatever you want to call it, with people. One is in innovators who are too protective of their idea because they're afraid somebody will steal it, copy it, whatever, and hence don't collaborate enough, but try to just close it off, and then people lose trust in the idea, or people don't get the economics right, or the economics aren't explainable. And yes, I can understand this, but in all fairness, I have hardly ever seen any patent in water that you can't circumvent. All the patents are process patents, not product patents, and all are pretty weak and pretty easy to circumvent. You don't win on protecting your IP, you win on having references, because then you have the reputation that you actually make something happen. And if somebody else comes and says, I can do the same thing, then they will say, but yeah, great, you can do the same thing, but there's this guy who can do it already and has 20 references or 30 references. Why should I try you? What do I gain, right? So that's one, being too protective. And the other one is not being open enough to constructive criticism. Sometimes people are so convinced this is the best thing since sliced bread that they don't listen when you tell them, well, look, there's 5 others who are almost the same as you. Unfortunately, you have never met them, but I have met them, or I've seen them, or I've heard of them. And please explain to me what differentiates you. And if nothing differentiates you, again, there's no gain. And you need to make your USP convincing. And I always cite this. I call it the 30% rule. You need to be 30% better or cheaper than the existing solution, because for 5 to 10%, nobody takes the risks. I mean, if I'm a utility operator and I work in that space, right, for 5% saving in a process step, I don't risk being in the news for having dead fish in the river or flooded an underpass or God knows what, because I mean, you're always in the news, or worst case in jail if you screw up, but you're never going to get praise for having saved 0.5% of the total process and 5% of one process step. You don't get anything. It's the risk return profile is just not right for such stuff. And then if you're an innovator and you don't live up to that reality and you're not listening to advice or to criticism of your product because you think it's so great, then you fail as well. That's the two failures. And I've had those both in things we invested into, the names of which I won't give away, where we again, in one, we didn't lose money because we had a good contract. So we got out. In the other one, we also lost money. Not as much as in the first failure, but we lost money.
Do you see that often in terms of, I guess, when it comes to founders who have invented a concept or something, that they're just so in love with their solution that they can't see past it in terms of taking criticism, and then almost for that individual to take investment and scale the business to the level in terms of becoming more of an operational CEO and less around the tech, that takes a certain, I don't know, founder to do that, right?
I mean, I learned from a co-investor we have in one of our technology investments how to frame a contract in a very positive way that says basically companies have cycles in life, that they have phases, right? It's like a kid, right? You start as a baby, you become a whatever, and then you become a teeny, blah, blah, blah. So in each phase, a different type of CEO is needed, or different type of management is needed. We will leave you in position, but we will assess your suitability in 2 or 3 years from now. And if we come to the conclusion you're not the best fit with the requirements, then we have the right to replace you by an outside manager. It was worded in a very nice way, right? But that's something that I now put into our contracts if we do tech investments as well, that we, if certain targets aren't met or certain things don't happen, we have the right to replace the founder and CEO. And I hate to do that, and we have not done it so far in the recent investments. But sometimes there's a maturity level that a company reaches, and then the person is not the right person anymore.
Right.
That's part of the game, right?
I love how you phrase that, because, my view is that happens more often than not in terms of, a founder having a shelf life, basically, as the company matures. And
it's not just the founder, every manager, even if it's a hired manager.
Oh, yeah, I absolutely agree with you. But I think that's news to, the founder, the, CEO that, is going down this journey. It's, I believe more often than not, it's assumed that they'll be there until there's an exit.
Yeah. I mean, they are the ones who make it, right? The ones who make it from beginning to end. They exist as well. And there's amazing success cases of such people, but it's also it's not wrong if there's a shelf life, right? I mean, it's not a failure. The failure is to not realize that you're not the right person anymore. That's the failure. It's the strength to realize that you're not the right person anymore and to hand over to somebody else.
That takes confidence and a level of self-awareness that, is valuable, in itself.
Totally agree.
So, Reinhard, you bring up an interesting point about, teams and leadership and so on. And, through my work with, hubs, accelerators, and so on, where you've got half a dozen water tech companies, and you look at one CEO and say, boy, that's a brilliant CEO with a lousy business model, and want to take that person and extract them and plug them into, a company that has a great business idea, great technology, but could use that experience. And unfortunately, I've never seen it really work terribly well. But it keeps rattling around. Like, wow, if you could build a hub or accelerator program, and just let everyone know that we might mix and match by the time you come out of here, and it'll be good for everybody. So, don't get too married to, your idea. I think that'd be pretty cool.
Hey, I'm on the jury of Imagine H2O. Maybe I should suggest that to them, right?
Yes.
There you go. There's a new strategy going forward. But
I'm with you.
But you're right. And the one other thing is, sharpen your pencil on what is your USP. What is it that is your value proposition to the user? And it must be crystal clear, why are you distinctive compared to the current solutions, and why are you distinctive compared to your competitor solutions? And know your competitors. We built up a database with water technology companies since we started at SKion that has something like 7,000 or 8,000 water technology companies. And when somebody pitches with us, I go into my database and I can search by technology type. I can say there's this 10 or 12 companies that tried the same thing. And so tell me why you will make it when all those other 10 didn't make it. And my favorite example is gasification of sewage sludge, which is inherently hard to do. And I personally visited probably 10 different installations because I was really trying to find one that works. And they all failed for the same reason, which is the ash melting point and the tar formation.
Right.
And then number 11 comes and I say, okay, do you know about number 1 to 10? And they hadn't heard of one of them. And you say, okay, sorry, but please don't waste your time. Don't waste that money. if you're smart people, go to a different company and as you said, right, put them into a good company but don't try sludge gasification.
Yeah. Reinhard, have you ever run into a startup that says, well, we don't have any competitors? I mean, it's a loaded question because I've heard that.
Yeah, I mean, the wildest one that showed up on my desk was one that wanted to use cavitation, which is something that exists, right? It destroys pumps, so it's real. Wanted to use cavitation to solve all problems of this planet related to water. They had zero business now. In 5 years, they wanted to have $1 billion in turnover and 600 million in EBITDA. That was a joke that I made when we started, right? That was a business plan that I got. And I was like, yeah, right. There's never been a company that made more than 50 million from zero in 5 years on this planet in water. And you want to go to $1 billion with 600 million EBITDA and you want to use cavitation to solve everything. Thank you very much.
Suddenly the alarm bells are ringing, right?
Yeah, we classify these business plans by the substance that they must have consumed by when they invented the numbers, right? But this was off the scale. This was beyond crystal meth. It sounds like I'm cynical, right? I mean, I really want technology companies to succeed, and that's also why I'm so blunt about this. Because in the 10 years that I've been in this now, I've seen good things fail for sad reasons. I've seen stuff being funded with amazing amounts of money that never could work. And it's just so sad. This money could have been spent on delivering water to the poor. It could have been spent on good technologies, blah, blah, blah.
I can't remember anyone else framing it the way you just framed it. That, $1 spent on a bad idea, a bad team, is $1 not used to have impact elsewhere where it's proven that you'll have an impact, delivering wash services, things like that. And I don't think we have this conversation enough in the world of water. We just really don't. It's like we're going to Las Vegas and, I mean,
it's hard to do the impact work. We are trying a few things, like I mentioned, this ceramic membrane, right? One of the advantages is it can go dry and wet again. Polymeric membranes don't like that. So the guys at Ovivo have developed a basically hand-operated filter. You take the water that comes out of the borehole and you run through that thing. You operate it by hand and it pushes the water through the membrane. And because the flux of that membrane is pretty good or very good, you need a small membrane and you can filter quite a lot of water. And you can clean it with all kinds of stuff. Any chemical, whatever you can think of, you can clean it with. So it can actually be pretty self-sustaining in the middle of nowhere in Africa. And we've done projects with nonprofits in Africa.
That's interesting.
So we try, but the challenge in most developing places is governance. It's not technology. It's not a technology problem. It's a governance problem, right? The government doesn't care, or there's corruption, or there's vested interest, because the people who sell the bottled water or who sell the water from a tanker, they make shitloads of money, and they hate it if somebody puts up a water kiosk and all of a sudden their truck doesn't get customers anymore, right? They hate it.
And that's a technical term, shitload, right?
Yes.
That's jargon, term of art in the world of startups. Well, you bring up a really another important point. I often talk about wicked water problems or wicked problems, and one of the definitions of wicked problems is that they're usually caused by public policy failure.
Yeah.
And water, tragically fits in that really nicely. So, if we could fix public policy and governance, then we'd have a better shot at solving.
This is not just in developing countries, right? PFAS has been one big governance failure. And lead has been one big governance failure.
Lead, yeah, exactly. Well, and, if you look at the American West, the status quo is colliding with reality, and public policy is just like so slow to come to grips with this.
I mean, it sounds silly, but the concept that you own the water under your land is alien for a European, right? The public owns the water aquifers, and you need a license to abstract water, and you need to, in most places, also pay a fee if you abstract water from groundwater.
Well, Americans like to own things, Reinhard.
Yeah. I also like to own things, but maybe not aquifer below my garden, right?
Yeah, I'd like to own an asteroid one day. It's
Let's hope it doesn't drop on your house, right? Then you own it.
It's mine, right?
It's on my land, exactly.
Oh, I think that's a whole other episode in terms of public policy in the U.S. related to water.
Look, it's not a U.S. problem. It's across the world, and I mean, in Germany, we've been fortunate that the environmental policies were started quite early. But nitrate in groundwater is a public policy issue in Germany because the farmers have the better lobby, and we have significant pollution of groundwater waters with nitrate. And the limit in Germany is 50, in the US it's 10. With 50, you can't use that water to prepare baby food. If you live in an area where there's nitrate in the groundwater and you get your tap water, you can't use it for baby food. Is that an acceptable answer? No. So here we go in Germany. Sorry, I'm not. And to go further, the German government pumped more than 200 million euros into the development of technologies to recover phosphorus from wastewater. And then the recovered phosphorus, none of these products have an approval as a fertilizer. So none of them can be used as fertilizer after they were recovered. So the technologies were subsidized heavily, and then you can't use it as a fertilizer because another department is responsible for fertilizer approval.
Right. That's a great example of kind of lack of policy getting in the way of a truly... There's a circular solution right there, but the policy is playing catch up to the solution. Yeah,
I'm not going to blame the US. In Germany, it's the same.
Okay, well, that's 2 episodes then. We could do the US and then Germany.
Yes. There you go. It's a round the world global special with Reinhard.
I love it.
All righty. Well,
I leave the round the world expertise to others, but I'm happy to share my.
So, I mean, because I think the way you both summarized it is like a dollar that's invested in the wrong place that goes to waste is effectively a dollar that's not put towards access to water and sanitation where it's needed. So just to kind of use that as a closing point, what can we collectively do to kind of help Reinhard? Because obviously your expertise and you've got such a back catalogue of investments that have worked and things that haven't. I mean, for you, I think there's a bit of responsibility on your shoulders for new investors coming into this market to kind of share your expertise as well, right? So what can we do between me and Will and the stream to kind of help with that?
I mean, you're doing it already, right? Because you're doing this stream. So anybody who wants to have my 5 cents on something, I'm happy to share it within the limits of what my calendar allows. I talked to lots of people also who want to invest into water and try to guide them in a direction that's helpful for the sector. It's fragmented enough. I mean, I'm not afraid of competition for targets, right?
Right.
And it's also why we support stuff such as Imagine H2O, because I also want to guide startups in the right direction if possible, because we need innovation, let's face it. And if they refine their strategy in a way where more actually happens, in terms of deploying rather than just developing or talking about it, then it makes a difference. We try to put our money where our mouth is in terms of supporting technologies as well when we can. And that's also why we invest sometimes into companies, and sometimes we just buy and try. Sometimes we pilot together with them, or we introduce them to customers where there's no gain for us because we think it's part of our contribution that we have to do because we're one of the somewhat bigger players that we can every once in a while help, even if there's no business in it for us. But at the end of the day, it's also just about the sector being a little bit more open to risks. The investors, there's just too much money pouring into this sector because everybody now wants to do ESG. And some of that money is actually killing companies, right? Because it's poured at them and then they think money solves all the problems, but there's no strategy for the real world, which is not investing but deploying.
Right.
All I can do is speak about it, and maybe I'm sometimes considered cynical or biased or whatever, but I mean, I just try to share what I think could help.
100%.
I think that's the 3rd episode, Reinhard. ESG.
That's a big topic, yeah.
Well, it's worth pushing back on that a bit.
Because if you just do it to tick your box for your annual report, you actually do more harm than good. Because if it's just for an annual report, you invest and then you let them die because you don't support them, right? I mean, you need to want to do it, not just do it because you want to put something into your damn ESG report.
Yeah, so I agree with you. So ESG is not a strategy; it's a reporting strategy, not a sustainability strategy.
Yeah.
And it's, we're in a place now where the tail is wagging the dog.
Yeah.
And that is really not healthy.
Which doesn't mean that the pressure that somebody like Carbon Disclosure Project puts on corporates to report their footprint and so on is good, right? That's really good. But the money that's being poured in ticking boxes now, that's the scary part. Because it's just about ticking boxes. Like all the financial investors now want to do one or two of those investments so that they can report on their ESG investments, but they don't know what they do. That is going to be harmful for the companies they invest into.
Right. It's a dollar spent that could have been spent better actually having an impact.
And probably that company would be sometimes better off not having gotten that dollar because they get guided in the wrong direction by a shareholder who doesn't know anything about what he's doing.
Right.
Okay, 4th episode.
Okay, I don't make friends here today, but I make episodes. So that's good.
Well, oh, and the royalties you're going to get, Reinhard, amazing. Really?
I think we've got a title, Make Episodes, Not Friends. Right.
I will donate those royalties to some of the projects in Africa with its membrane.
There you go. I love it.
Well, gents, before we go down too many ESG rabbit holes, I think we'll try to kind of bring this to a close. We're at about 40 minutes. So, Reinhard, always good to catch up with you and kind of hear about your experience. And we'll amplify this as much as possible to any kind of additional, investment contacts we have, just to, position you, as you've already been doing, as a voice of reason. And you mentioned about being cynical, but I think me and Will talk about the power of unreasonable people. And I definitely think it's not bad to be an unreasonable person with that experience.
Well, there's a lot of passion here for sure, right? I fell in love with the water sector, and I just want to contribute as much as I can to making a bit of a difference.
We need more of you.
Well, Tom, Will, it was really fun to have this conversation, and I hope that sometime soon it will be in person and not just by video.
We will see you soon.
We will do in person. Right. Reinhard, appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
Be well.
Good,
Thank you, guys.
Afternoon, evening, wherever you are, right?
Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.